Hey everyone, welcome to Broadband Deployment News. Fort Collins, Colorado is in the process of deploying a broadband network, a fiber network for the citizens there. It's a city-owned network. So is that a success as it being touted, or is it a failure as some critics are suggesting? We'll talk about that today. Thanks for joining me. Rick Uzzi here with Broadband Deployment News. With all of the infrastructure money that's available now and more that's coming through the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, there are a lot of cities that are looking at getting into the broadband business. Obviously, there's a lot of cities that have already done that. There's, though, a lot of cities now that are considering that because that money is going to be available. And then also, the Biden administration is trying to push for that. They couldn't really get that in the act to say that you have to give priority to cities or other not-for-profit organizations like maybe electric co-ops, but you cannot exclude that as well. I talked about that yesterday with the state of Nebraska having laws in place that still exclude that, and they're trying to get rid of that. But here's Colorado, which is in a situation where they also have laws in place that restrict that, but I think the local communities could vote and get exceptions for that, and that was done in Fort Collins. So Fort Collins has gotten into the business. This was before a lot of this infrastructure money was available. So they did it through a bond effort, and they've got the network over 50% done now. So we're going to be looking at that today. But there's also some critics that are saying that it was mishandled and that it's a boondoggle and that the taxpayers are left holding the bill, that kind of thing. So we'll look at that, a couple of different stories that I wanted to show, and then I'm actually going to show some clips from a city council meeting which I think is really interesting. If you were a city, I think you can learn from this. It's just also interesting, in general, to watch the process. They're going to give a status of the network, of the update. This was back from December of last year. They give a status of the network and how things are going, and they talk about the costs and some challenges they've had. So there are some things you can learn as well if you are a city, so make sure that you stick around for that. So first off, let's look at some of these stories. So this is in government technology, and this is a positive story. So Fort Collins gets city-owned broadband network off the ground. Federal funds are coming for broadband expansion, but some local governments like Fort Collins, I'm trying to get my mouse in the right place here, hold on. Some local governments like Fort Collins, Colorado have already been working to build their own city-owned and operated networks. So again, this was done well in advance of any of these federal dollars being available, or at least the vast majority of what's been coming out. Fort Collins, Colorado is a pioneer in city-led efforts to offer residents their own innovative solutions, a municipal fiber network. City leaders argue that this solution can deliver higher speeds, lower costs, and superior customer service compared to private internet service providers. I'm sure a lot of private internet providers would argue with that, but certainly in certain cases of certain areas, unfortunately, the private providers that were there were not doing a good job, and that could be anybody from a small operator, but quite often it was a larger operator that was not providing the kind of service or the kind of prices that they felt they needed there. So while Fort Collins Connection, that's what they call it, Connection spelled that way, the city's community-owned fiber to the premises network is expected to be fully operational by the end of this year. The project's been in the works for the past decade. First, it talks about they had to get buy-in. So Fort Collins became interested in creating a citywide fiber network following the 2012 launch of Google Fiber in Kansas City, Missouri. So that started them thinking about it. Fort Collins was well positioned to embark on this journey because the city already provided electricity and water, so the idea of public-owned utilities was not completely novel for residents. The trust in the city to operate a utility was already there. So I guess if they're doing a good job with electric and water, then people will say, well, maybe they'll do a good job with broadband, and that certainly can be the case. The largest obstacle to getting started was legislative. Colorado SB 152 was a 2005 law preventing communities from offering telecommunications services. Fort Collins needed residents to approve an exemption. When it was put to a vote in 2015, the law was overturned with 83% support. 2 years later, the city again asked the community to back broadband by approving a ballot measure that would add telecommunication to the utility charter and make a bond of up to $150 million available for the project. The measure passed with 57% of the vote, and November 2018 marked the official start of construction. So they did this through bonds, and these bonds are supposed to be paid back eventually through the subscription dollars that are coming in for the service. So supposedly would not cost the city people, or the city residents anything as far as taxes. As of December 2021, the take rate, the proportion of potential customers using the service, was at 31%, already exceeding the necessary 28% rate to pay back the bond. Now, there are some challenges they'll talk about here in a minute, and that we'll go through. So, plus, the project is ahead of schedule, he reported. Fiber construction to the front of every single home is expected to be complete by the summer of 2022, and service is expected to be available to all designated locations by the end of the year. So, it'll be available to all residential customers, and it'll be available to all designated locations by the end of the year. But one of the challenges that they had has to do with businesses, and also especially MDUs, and having to deal with business owners, which we'll hear about here in a little bit. While partnerships with private entities can offer broadband access to a lot of residents, the city's current broadband director, Chad Krager, who took over when Keene retired in 2021, said that the issue then is that cities lose control, not only of the revenue produced, but also of the customer experience for constituents. The focus on the customer is something that he said sets the city operated network apart from its incumbents. So, and that is, a lot of cities are, you're hearing this now, a lot of cities are doing these public-private partnerships because the city doesn't really want to be in the business like this. Maybe, it's different, right? Even if they provide power and water, talking about broadband is a totally different kind of technology. A lot of the same things as far as supporting public utilities could be done, but it's a different technology. So some cities are not wanting to run that, but they will actually take the leap of building out the network. So they will go ahead and learn how to put in fiber. A lot of them are putting in fiber for other things already maybe, so they maybe have that down, but they don't want to manage a residential or, let's say, a retail broadband business. So they partner up with somebody who's already in the business. They'll lay the fiber, the city will lay the fiber, they'll get everything set up, and then somebody will come in, maybe partner with a telephone company or some other entity that will then run that business for them. So they're saying here in Fort Collins they didn't want to do that. And that's partially, again, to keep control of the experience for the customer. Planning entailed a lot of conversations with other cities that have entered the world of municipal broadband, from Chattanooga, Tennessee to Wilson, North Carolina. The extensive research Fort Collins did set the city up for success, as leadership was able to anticipate challenges early on, because in spite of this due diligence with a large infrastructure project, there are likely to be unexpected obstacles, and they did see some of those. Krager said that in working on high-level summary updates, the plan in December 2021, it was found that additional funds will be needed to close close to $20 million to build new conduit and serve the increasing number of sites that will need connection. So they had some miscalculations on the amount of conduit they would need, and then maybe they didn't take into account the growth. So they've got, if they're going to provide this to everybody, as they add new people start moving into the area, new greenfield builds, those kinds of things, that's going to influence the cost down the road. One of the key lessons learned is the importance of having city leaders, staff, and community aligned on the goals before starting a project like this. It can be a big undertaking to operate, even if the network is built, because it is a 24/7 operation. Billing systems, on-call systems, and crew need to be available at all hours of the day in case of technical issues. That's true. That would be true of water, electricity, that kind of thing, but it's a different animal when you're talking about broadband service. Now this is a different take on the situation from Real Clear Policy. City of Fort Collins taxpayers left with $45 million bill for failed internet projects. So they're immediately off the bat calling it a failed internet project. So you're looking at a different perspective here from, I would imagine, an organization that does not support municipal broadband at all. So that's their take on this. And where they're getting that from, you see here, on the local level, municipalities are failing spectacularly in their quest to own the internet and costing taxpayers big bucks along the way. For example, Sarah Hunt, a resident of Fort Collins, Colorado, investigated the mismanagement of their local taxpayer-funded government broadband experiment. In total, Fort Collins residents were left footing a $45 million bill. It's not exactly true because, again, these funds are supposed to be paid back through, and I don't know if I have that in one of the clips I'm going to show, but they have a reserve from the utility that they're probably going to do it through. But in any event, what they're hoping is that the subscriptions that they're getting are going to cover all of this, and there won't be taxpayer funds for that. Hunt concluded connection Connection missed target revenues by nearly $10 million and is over budget on build-out and installation by a massive $35 million. Fort Collins missed their target by such a large margin due to poor estimates and assumptions. The city overestimated the existing amount of conduit, and that's true. Underestimated the cost of installation, and that's true. Overestimated the amount of apartment and multifamily unit consumers. They did not anticipate how difficult it may be to get business or building owners to sign up as quickly as they would like. And then overestimated the number of businesses and commercial subscribers. And certainly, I think they do say that, especially with the pandemic, there may be less need at businesses for this. So that, again, this story is based on one resident who has a bone to pick here. So again, this is her story or her article that she got posted here. Hunt, Fort Collins resident sold a bill of goods with Connection. Former Connection Executive Director Coleman Keene failed the residents of Fort Collins. We recently learned that Keene ought to have known that the business plan, which included all of the projected costs and revenues for the Fort Collins Municipal Broadband project, also known as Connection, or Connection, I think they call it just that, Connection, was highly inaccurate. Keene was paid $248,000 per year for the 3 years he served as Connection's executive director, a position he accepted after working as a consultant to the city for municipal broadband. So maybe he was involved, if he was a consultant, maybe he was involved in figuring out the costs, and then they brought him on as a hire. His salary was second only to perennial Connection cheerleader, city manager Darren Atterbury, who was paid $278,000 per year until he too left the city's employ conveniently just before the truth about Connection's failings were finally made public. And this is a link to the city council meeting. And I'm going to go ahead, I'll provide a link at the end of this to the full city council meeting. There's actually, it starts right where they start talking about the broadband project, and it's very interesting. Again, if you're a city, you definitely want to watch this. But I found it interesting watching myself. And she talks about, some of the failed assumptions about pre-existing conduit and the cost of installation and commercial buildings and the total number of commercial business subscribers they could get. So again, you've got the very negative story that's based on one resident who watched this particular presentation. I've got a few screenshots of the presentation just to kind of set this up. So this is as the new person that's the director over this service is talking about it. So he came on board when this other person left. And here they're showing the service area that's currently available, what's not yet available, and what's in design. So the green part is what's available. The orange part is construction areas, and then these small yellow parts are still under design. So you can see they're saying they've got over 66% of their fiber areas completed. And they say a fiber area on average serves about 225 homes. So, and then their take rate is currently at 31%, which is actually exceeding what they had predicted in their business plan. And then he laid out the business plan and some of the shortfalls and things that are going on here for the council. The business plan assumptions, and one thing that he talks about, I don't know if I have it in the clip, but he talks about the fact that when you start out from scratch, and this is going to be for any project, you don't know what you don't know, right? So you're going to do your best and make assumptions and try to build in some padding there, but you don't always know what you don't know, and that seems to have been the case here. So they've got their business plan assumption. They had 70,000 premises that they were planning on hooking up, and that's increased to 78,000, and that would be due to growth, just people moving into the area over that time. That maybe this would be, I guess, new construction. That would be either new apartments, new businesses, new residences, those kinds of things. Conduit available, they thought they'd be able to use 72% of existing conduit, and they could only use 48%. And in one of the clips I show, he explains why that is. Initial installation costs, $592 per install. That went up to $705 per install, and I think a lot of that would have been related to conduit availability. And premise boring, actually. So originally they had $0 for premise boring, but somebody made a significant mistake. Maybe the consultant who later became the director who then left. Somebody made a significant mistake on premise boring. So instead of $0, that's $8.5 million. That was not anticipated. Full absorption, originally they thought that would be 2022, and now they're saying it's 2024 now. That is, the difference there seems to be strictly businesses and MDU kinds of locations, not residential homes. And what they mean by absorption is they plan on having all of these areas pretty well covered by the end of 2022, but it may be till 2024 that they get up to the full take rates that they were expected. So the residential take rate plan was 28% by the end of 2022. That's gone up. They expect that now to be 35%, which is good, by 2022, end of 2022 this year. The commercial take rate, however, 45% is what they were anticipating by the end of this year, and now they're saying it's only going to be 28%, and that's going to be by the end of 2024. So they have that, which did not work out as they had planned. So again, I'm going to go ahead and run some of this here for you, because again, I think it's interesting. And this is going to be after he does his presentation and some of the city council members ask some questions. So we'll see how they answer that. And I think you get a good idea of where they are in this project.
I have one, Chad. I just noticed on one of the slides it said that the premise boring in the original business plan was 0. How could that ever be? I mean, because obviously there was going to be boring. So how would that be part of an original? And maybe that wasn't your responsibility. First of all.
So again, she's apologizing here because this guy came on fairly recently. So she's like, I know this wasn't your fault. He's been with the city for quite a while, but he just now took on the role of heading all of this up.
Welcome. Congratulations on your new position. I'm sorry I didn't say that. I'm just, that number sort of surprised me.
Yeah, Mayor, I appreciate that. So the original business plan did have boring to build out the main piece we call the network build. And that was what was done by AEG. What was not in there, and if I could, if all of us could go back and redo the original business plan, we would. But
Sure.
What was not in the original business plan was how do we get from the streets across these massive parking lots, whether it's commercial or whether it's NDUs or driveways, how do we get across that? Because, if we don't have a boring contractor that can cross that and have funds, then we can't serve those buildings. And so the installation costs in the original business plan didn't take that into account. And so we anticipated some lessons learned as we move forward. And that's why this is a great time that we're rolling out soon with an updated business plan that really reflects accurate numbers and confidence in not only numbers, but how we're going to build out Fort Collins.
So what he's saying there is they obviously had to do boring, and they had all of that in the cost structure as far as the main network and getting fiber where it needed to go. But once you get to a building, you may have to go under a parking lot, whether that's a business or maybe an MDU, a multi-tenant unit, multi-dwelling unit, or even just a residential home if you need to somehow get through a driveway or under a driveway or something like that. They did not take that into account.
Okay, thanks. And why is the business take rate lower than had been anticipated? Do you know why?
Yeah, one of the answers to that is that based on what we're trying to do with businesses as far as reach those take rates is there's a lot of work to reach all of the businesses. And so what we try to do is really be a little conservative with our estimates. If we can increase that up to 40%, that would be great. But one of the realities that we're learning is that we want to try to get what we can to businesses, but because of COVID, what's interesting is some businesses aren't even having folks come back to work. And so there's much less of a need for the high-speed internet, which is awesome for our residential, but it affects what the commercials are, because if they do get connection, which we want to provide, the services they need are much lower than they would have pre-COVID, just because they don't have hundreds of people at the office that would be in meetings or needing to transfer data or anything else. And so our business plan assumptions, or our original business plan was much higher. Obviously, there was no pandemic in that. Right. But in addition, there's quite a bit of focus and attention needed to commercial businesses in order to reach any take rates, because their needs are so specific versus most of the residential and MDU.
Thank you. Okay. Those are all the questions I had. Anybody else? I'm sure there's more.
And I skipped some questions here from some folks. I just picked the ones that I thought were most interesting.
Anyone else? Susan, go ahead.
Hi, Chad. I just have a couple of questions for you. One of them is that conduit availability. Could you explain what that means? Because I'm not sure why the 70% assumption, but then current 48.
Sure, thanks, Councilmember. So before this job started, we as the city of Fort Collins, when we put light and power underground, there was other conduit or empty conduit that was available for other use. Now keep in mind, some of that conduit was put in almost 50 years ago. And so as time has gone on, whether it's root damage or freeze thaw or whatever that may be, what we thought was 72%, when we actually checked that conduit, or what we call proof to see what was empty, that ended up being only 48% of that empty conduit that we can use. And that was really just because of the condition of that conduit that we had no idea of anticipating, because really we've never needed it in this type of volume prior to starting connection.
Mm-hmm. Did that add then to kind of an unanticipated increase in your expenditure?
It was a huge unanticipated increase because the boring, while it is impactful, it is also the most expensive part of the project. And that is exactly why when we started the project, we thought we'd have this vacant conduit, which would really bring down the overall cost of the project. And what we found was we needed to do much more boring than we anticipated, because remember, it's not just the boring itself, but we may run into rock or any other material when we're boring that drives up that overall cost. And so the lack of available conduit is one of the main drivers really for the increase in the overall project of the network build that AEG is doing.
Okay, that helps to understand that.
Any other?
So, that is a huge thing. So, again, if you're a city, you might take this into account that if you think you have conduit available, maybe you need to somehow do a kind of a pre-check of that to make sure that's okay. Because again, that was a huge impact that they had as far as costs go. Because if you think you've got conduit there and you can just run fiber through it versus having to bore a completely new hole and stick conduit in, it's a big impact on what your costs are going to be.
Questions? Shirley or Tricia? Oh, Tricia, go ahead.
Yeah, just one quick question for you, Chad. With the irregularities that we're still seeing in the supply chain and the rate of inflation, do you feel like those are taken into account well enough with the numbers that you have tonight?
I appreciate that, Councilmember. So where we would be impacted the most right now is going to be from a material standpoint. And so know that we saw this over a year ago. And so we have been ordering as much fiber as we can, because with the current infrastructure bill that passed, there's a lot of people that are going to want fiber.
It's a really good point. So again, if you are if you're currently in the business, you need to be thinking about planning ahead, because with all of these infrastructure dollars that are coming, a lot of it's coming out right now with ARPA and with RDOF and other programs. And then, we've got this money that's going to be coming out early next year. And as soon as that hits and people start putting in fiber, there's going to be this incredible demand for fiber and equipment, those kinds of things. Hopefully we'll have the supply chain, just the general supply chain issue worked out by then. And I would hope that you've got equipment manufacturers and fiber manufacturers and others trying to anticipate these needs that we're going to have. They're really going to have to get inventory up to be able to handle this demand. But this was a great question, including the part about inflation as well, because that's something that we're having to deal with right now.
So we are ordering ahead just for the reason that you mentioned, and continue to monitor the supply chain that's happening, not just in this nation, but around the world. And so we have included inflation in that overall financial model for things that are outside of the supply chain costs as well.
Thank you. That's reassuring. Appreciate it.
So I thought those were some good questions. There were a couple other good questions I didn't put in there that were interesting, but I thought those were the most interesting questions as far as maybe some things to be aware of. And something else he mentioned, I don't think it was in there as far as how he responded, but the other challenge that they realized they would have, and this had to do with businesses and MDUs, was that you can get the fiber to the curb, but then you need to work with the business owner in order to have the authority to go in there and do that. So if you've got an MDU with apartment dwellers, that kind of thing, or a multi-tenant unit that's got businesses in it, you have to get approval from the business owner to get your fiber there and then up into the subscribers. So in some cases, he mentioned, those owners aren't even in the state of Colorado. So that's another thing that's delaying the take rate for businesses. So anyway, again, if you are a city, I think this is a great thing to watch. I found it very interesting. And if you are a city or an EMC or any other kind of service provider that is providing broadband or thinking about it, don't forget about us. We can help in all these areas. Again, if you've not done it before, if you're a city or maybe an electric membership co-op and you are deploying broadband for the first time, give us a call, send us an email. We can help you with that, everything from start to finish. We can help with the feasibility, engineering, construction, design, that kind of thing. And then also, which we've been doing for over 20 years now, would be managed services. It was started on dial-up, but now it's broadband managed services, whether that be the kind of stuff that you would offer over your broadband network. So customers still want email, we can do that. You've got IPTV, we've got a fully featured IPTV product, including programming. We've got residential and commercial VoIP. We provision devices, we've got fiber diagnostics. What else is there? Oh, 24/7 tech support, or just overflow support if you've got your own support. We can do weekends if you want, or we can do 24/7, whatever you need. So see the number there, you see our email address and our website. Check us out. Thanks for joining me. If this was helpful, give me a thumbs up on the video if you would. And click subscribe, click the little bell, and you'll be notified when I'm live. And I'm live every day. So I will see you next time. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.